Welcome back to Talk. I'm Russell Quirk in for Ian Collins, here till 4 o'clock. Let's now talk again about two-tier sentencing with an expert, David Spencer, who's Head of Crime and Justice at Policy Exchange. He's also a former Metropolitan Police officer. David, thanks for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
So what do you make of this then? So this was a story at the beginning of the week, David, where the Sentencing Council, 15 of them, Sentencing Council members, decided to publish the fact that they think that those that breach migration rules and laws should be treated with kid gloves. It seems that the Justice Secretary has gone back and said, actually, I'm uncomfortable with this. I think that people, funnily enough, should be treated equally no matter who they are or where they come from, the law being fair and equitable, no fear, no favour, so to speak. And the Sentencing Council today have come back and said to Ms Mahmood, no, sorry, we think this is how it should be. So, A, what do you make of that? B, who on earth do these people think they are? I mean, they're not accountable, they're not elected, they have, yes, no accountability to us as the electorate. How on earth can the tail be wagging the dog like this?
Well, the furore that's come up today is about pre-sentence reports in the guideline that the Sentencing Council have issued, and who, the phrase they use is who should normally receive or be the subject of pre-sentence reports. And as you indicate, there's all sorts of groups on that, but it includes those from an ethnic, faith or cultural minority. And the Justice Secretary has unsurprisingly said that she's not very happy with that. She wants to see that changed, and the Sentencing Council have said, no, we're not going to change it. And you touch on the wider policy issue here, which is that this is what we're looking at here is not about individual sentencing of offenders, of criminals. What we're looking at is the overarching policy framework here. So it's about the overarching policy and the approach that the state takes to dealing with these people rather than individual sentences. And because it's an overarching policy, that is rightly the purview of government, ministers and parliament. So it's pretty astounding that, as you say, this arm's length body today, after being asked by the Lord Chancellor perfectly reasonably a week or so ago to relook and reconsider the guideline, that the Sentencing Council has come back today and said, no, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to ignore what you want, Lord Chancellor, and we're just going to push ahead. And it's pretty remarkable. I think what's really interesting about this case as well is that this isn't really a party political issue. There's a lot of ding-dong in the Houses of Parliament and the House of Commons about it, but actually it's not a party political issue, because what we find is that the Lord Chancellor, Shabana Mahmood, and the Shadow Lord Chancellor, Robert Jenrick, both basically agree that the Sentencing Council have completely overstepped the market.
But on both issues, so just to be clear, there are two issues here as far as I'm concerned. You know, one is the introduction of almost mandatory pre-sentencing reports for those of an ethnic minority, but then also the other issue around immigration law breaking. In other words, there are two separate issues here, but both are being advised by way of the Sentencing Council that in both instances judges should be much more lenient. So this isn't just one issue, this is two. By the way, we have just received a statement which has come from Downing Street, which, David, I should just read. Keir Starmer is ready to change the law to block two-tier sentencing rules after judges defied him by keeping them in place. Downing Street said just now all options are on the table, including emergency legislation, as the government reviews the role and the powers of the Sentencing Council. Wow, this is good news, isn't it? And very practical, very welcome. The escalating row between ministers and the judiciary comes after the council has just proposed rules that would have required judges to consider the ethnicity of criminals when passing sentences. The council refused to reconsider their view, despite a backlash from ministers, including Sir Keir and Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary. So it does look, I mean, despite it not being political, you're right, it's kind of cross-party in terms of their objection to this. But Keir Starmer actually has grown a pair by the looks of it. It looks like he is going to rail against this and prevent this, can we call them a rogue sentencing council, from doing what they think is right and effectively imposing two-tier justice on Britain.
Well, the Sentencing Council, of course, was set up by the last Labour government back in through legislation in 2009. They started their work in 2010, and they were set up by an act of Parliament. So Parliament set them up, and frankly, if Parliament wants to, they can.
It could get rid of them.
Well, if Parliament wants to, that's exactly what.
Let's talk about them quickly. I mean, there's 15 members of this sentencing council. Again, I'll keep saying it. They are unelected. They are therefore unaccountable. They have a mandate, but not from the people. They have a mandate, as you say, from Parliament. They seem to be able to shout the odds and do exactly what they want. There's a president. There's 14 other council members that range from judges, also through magistrates, justices of the peace, lawyers, a chief constable, and so on. A former Director of Public Prosecutions, and so on. And the problem is, I mean, I'm not sure if there's any checks and balances with regard to this particular gaggle of individuals in terms of, you know, who they are and how they are put in place. What's the vetting? Do we make sure that actually, a bit like they have in the United States with the Supreme Court, on which 9 justices sit, you know, there's a lot made of the makeup demographically, politically of those members to ensure that justice is put out democratically, that it is set out and dispensed in a proper, balanced way. I don't think anyone seems to know where the likes of Her Honour Judge Amanda Rippon and Stephen Parkinson and Chief Constable Rob Nixon and District Judge Magistrates Court Stephen Leake and the Honourable Mrs Justice May, they're just some of the names, how they get appointed. I mean, can you enlighten us as to where these people are taken from and what the criteria is?
So all of this is set down in legislation in the Coroners and Justice Act 2009, and there's 8 members of the council are judges of one form or another, and 6 members are called non-judicial members, and they're sort of people with experience of the system, like policing, probation, criminal defence, criminal prosecution, including the Director of Public Prosecutions is on the board there on the council. So all of this is set down by statute. And so I go back to the point, if government wants to and Parliament wants to change the way the Sentencing Council operates, they're well within their rights to do so.
Well, it looks like Keir Starmer is going to do that, and it might be one of the first things in 9 months that Keir Starmer does that I actually agree with. It looks like he's going to take them to task, and I guess, look, this is a threat. This is a warning shot across the bows of the Sentencing Council to say, look, if you don't accept the will of ministers, which, by the way, the will of ministers should be the will of the people, then ultimately I'm going to invoke emergency legislation and I may well get rid of you. I should also read, there is a Sentencing Council statement which is very short, very ambiguous, frankly. It says the Sentencing Council has given very careful consideration to the Lord Chancellor's request to amend or reconsider its recently published revised guideline, imposition of community or custodial sentences. The Council has written to the Lord Chancellor to explain why we have decided not to make the requested changes. So it doesn't say why they've decided not to make the requested changes, it just tells us they've written to say that they won't be making the requested changes. That doesn't seem very transparent, does it?
No, well, I mean, the letters that they sent are pretty lengthy, but I've got to say...
Have you seen them?
They include, yeah, I've seen the letters, and, you know, they're pretty lengthy letters.
What's the reasoning then? Just tell us, can you summarise what the reasoning is, David, in terms of the Sentencing Council decided to defy a Minister of the Crown?
Well, the justification is pretty flimsy, to be honest. They've taken the view that this is what they think should happen, and that it is entirely within their purview to do so, despite the fact that this is about an overarching policy matter. And they have, you know, you talked about them getting a shot across the bow. Well, the reality is the Sentencing Council had a shot across the bow 2 weeks ago, has had the opportunity to make changes, has chosen not to do so. And so we're well past the point of shot on the bow, across the bow now. Where we are now, is, as the Prime Minister said and the Secretary of State for Justice has indicated, we're now well beyond that. We're now time for emergency legislation to get this dealt with, because the reality is the guideline that we're talking about pre-sentence reports, comes into effect on Tuesday. People being sentenced in court on Tuesday will be subject to this guideline. So if the government wants to change it, they need to get legislation moving very, very quickly.
And David, just for those of us that have not been in policing and are not legally qualified, what are the implications of automatically mandating that everyone from an ethnic minority must go through pre-sentencing reports? I mean, we've heard a lot over the last day or two that means that person is likely then to receive a diluted sentence. Just explain why that is the case. Is that true? Is that correct?
Well, pre-sentence reports are prepared usually by a probation officer, and they can either be in writing or they can be delivered orally in court. But it's basically an assessment based by that probation officer about the offender, and it can be about their sort of their risk to the public, their risk to themselves, the likelihood of them committing other crimes, whether they would respond to a community order or whether they should just go straight to prison. So it's a whole load of background that gets presented to the court. And then the court, particularly in borderline cases, can then say, well, having read the report, I think actually I'm going to either suspend the sentence or I'm going to subject you to a community order, or do not pass go straight to prison. And these pre-sentence reports can be really critical in borderline cases as to whether someone ends up going to prison or whether they end up doing a non-custodial sentence. And that's where, whether it's automatic or, as the Sentencing Council say, would normally be required. That's why it's so important, because if you are from an ethnic, faith or cultural minority, as the Sentencing Council describes it, then you would normally be entitled to a pre-sentence report. If you can't fit yourself into one of these cohorts that they've listed for their own reasons, then I'm afraid no pre-sentence report for you unless the judge explicitly decides to do so.
And David, would you unequivocally agree that this is the very epitome of two-tier justice?
Well, I certainly think that if it's not the epitome of it, then I don't know what is.
So that's a yes.
We hear time and again people from the criminal justice world telling us that two-tier justice, two-tier sentencing, two-tier policing doesn't exist. And then we look at all of this, and it is unsurprising that people come away from it thinking, actually, no, we do have a two-tier system here. It is completely unsurprising.
Well, I wonder if we have for a while, and because the Sentencing Council members have seen that playing out in practicality, they now believe that they can formalise it because it's been playing out. Now, of course, this puts Keir Starmer in a very, very sticky position, because he has said at the lectern very publicly that it doesn't exist, as you say, that there is no such thing as two-tier policing, which there is, no such thing as two-tier justice, which there is. He has to now stand up, whether he believes in this or not, doesn't he, to say that he's going to stop this, because otherwise it shows that all along he realised there was, and he's putting his kind of, thumbprint of approval on this reckless Sentencing Council, as a consequence. So he's really got to stand up and make sure he wins this battle, isn't he?
Well, that's why it's so positive that him and the Lord Chancellor have come out today unequivocally and said they're going to take action and that all options are on the table. I think there's nothing about the Prime Minister has said or the Secretary of State for Justice said that I don't support. They absolutely need to take action, and if they do, they will absolutely have my support in doing so.
Well, justice clearly should be fair and even-handed. It is as simple as that. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what race you are, what gender you are, what age you are. Obviously, it is obvious, right the way back to the Magna Carta, that justice should be dispensed evenly and by way of balance. That is an obvious thing to say, but what we're seeing here in Britain, played out on the streets and now played out by way of some otherwise, you would imagine, intelligent, sensible people of the Sentencing Council in formal terms too. I hope that the Sentencing Council are either disbanded or the constitution of that council is changed so that they are elected. I'd love to know how they are appointed, whether they are vetted for political affiliation, because it seems to me like they're a bunch of left-leaners. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what it looks like. David Spencer, Head of Crime and Justice Policy Exchange, thank you very much indeed.